my god, let's talk about Rocknaldo. I'm going to do my best to take this review as seriously as possible. That alone should tell you guys something about how this episode went. What should also tell you something is the fact that I'm going to do my best not to come off as too angry as I do this review. And this isn't my exasperated over-the-top anger either. This episode, thinking about it too much, genuinely makes me angry. This episode is about Steven discovering that Ronaldo is spreading false information about the gems and telling him so, spurring Ronaldo to give up his blog, declare himself a crystal gem, move in with Steven, and hijack Steven's life and identity. Not literally, he doesn't pretend to be Steven or think he's Steven or insist that people call him Steven. He hijacks Steven's identity the same way that someone might hijack the identity of their friend who is a different race. He creates a bloodstone gemsona and immediately just starts considering himself to be the most important of the crystal gems. He just immediately starts insisting that everything revolve around him. He even goes so far as to call out Steven for not being loving and accepting enough to put up with it. At which point Steven thankfully realizes that Ronaldo is just full of shit and tells him off, and Ronaldo leaves. And then a whopping 3 weeks pass. That is 3 more weeks that the gems have not gone and gotten the rubies. And Steven accidentally bumps into Ronaldo, and Ronaldo has started spreading more correct information about the gems, telling a more complete and correct story. I don't even know where to start. I guess we could start with the couple of things that this episode does well, because it does do a couple of things well. First of all, the more assertive Steven that we've been seeing in recent episodes is consistently portrayed here. He is that assertive Steven, again here with Ronaldo. It also definitely seems like he's starting to find a balance between his old accepting self and his new assertive self, that he has worked out how those two things can coexist with each other. That was excellent. I was really glad to see that, but in an episode named after Ronaldo, Steven's character development should have been second to Ronaldo's. I know he's the main character, but I'm sorry. That's how it works in a self-titled episode about a recurring character. And yet Steven is the only one who actually gets any real growth here. And I'll talk about that again in a minute. Second of all, this episode did do a very good job of portraying toxic allyship. That being where a person tries to be helpful towards a marginalized race, towards a race that is misunderstood, but ends up just making everything about themselves instead. That is literally what Ronaldo did here. And it was portrayed as the negative thing that it is, and it was shown how you should respond to somebody like that. Try to be accepting of them. Try to help them to change for the better, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't seem like they're going to, kick them out the door. There was also a very clear undertone, I say undertone even though it took up the majority of the runtime of the episode. There was also a clear undertone here of the crew commenting on the most toxic aspects of the fandom, the more extreme aspects of the Steven Universe fandom through Ronaldo, which is what they've always done with Ronaldo. They've always reflected part of the fandom onto Ronaldo so they could comment on it. But lines like, "You're just a guy with a blog," referring to people who feel so self-important about themselves because they have a Steven Universe blog. Making it clear that it's their show and that fans don't get to dictate how it goes just because they'd prefer to see something different or in a different order. Stuff like that was fine, but it ended up being the majority of the episode. Again, this was a self-titled episode. It was titled after Ronaldo. And yet, rather than develop his character, they just pumped him full of these traits of the more extreme side of the SU fandom so that they could comment on how much they hate it, rather than just use 1 or 2 of those traits to drive Ronaldo's characterization forward. I mean, it's fine if they want to have an outright villain character who embodies all of these negative traits and then comes in and gets his comeuppance. But by trying to combine those traits, by trying to combine that villain character with all those traits with Ronaldo, someone we're supposed to sympathize with, someone we're supposed to want to see evolve in this narrative, all they did was further exemplify all of the problems that I've had with Ronaldo since the very beginning. Rather than getting an episode where his characterization was more in line with the better parts of Horror Club, we got an episode where his characterization was more in line with Keep Beach City Weird, where he was arguably at his worst. And while that is consistent, he should have grown by now. He's been affected by events in the show. After Horror Club, it actually seems like he's taken several steps backwards. With all of the consistently better writing for Ronaldo lately, I expected so much more than this. Remember how back in my review of Keep Beach City Weird, at the end I said that the worst thing that PD could have done for him was feed into his self-importance at the end with more conspiracy theories? That if he hadn't done that, while it would have left Ronaldo broken for a while, he eventually would have worked through it and become a better person for it? Well, Turns out I was right. Because what does Steven do in this episode? He puts an end to Ronaldo's self-importance, doesn't feed back into it just because Ronaldo gets sad. And then we see Ronaldo has started to work through that self-importance and has started to become a better person. That means that this is exactly the same plot, at its barest bones, as Keep Beach City Weird, 4 seasons later, with the ending that it should have had in the first place. Any development in Ronaldo's character that builds off of this episode could have come 4 years ago. Keep that in mind. And I do say any development that could be built off of this episode because Ronaldo doesn't actually develop in this episode. Yes, he is spreading more accurate information about the gems now, but he still does it without talking to them first, without getting their permission first. He's still using their likenesses without their permission. He still feels entitled to their story. He may not be acting so self-important about it now, he may not be so overt about it now, but he is the same toxic ally that he was throughout this entire episode. He's just shown that he's willing to change the way he thinks, and that with enough time, he might start thinking in ways that are more beneficial to the people he's trying to help rather than himself. It doesn't actually show that he has changed. And in case anyone out there wants to ask the question, but AJ, if you think the crew did such a bad job, how would you have done better? Well, kids, sit down, because I'm about to tell you a story. I'll tell you exactly how I would have made it better. I would have brought in Uncle Andy. Yes, I am 100% serious. I would have brought in Uncle Andy. Let's be clear about this. I definitely think they're setting up Andy to be a character who grows a lot in the background of episodes, who we see occasionally interacting with Steven or the gems or Steven and the gems, and we get to see over time how he progresses as a person. I do believe that the crew wants to go forward with that to show how bigotry can be erased by kindness. And yet, we haven't actually seen any of that yet. So, what I would have done here is I would have tied Andy's story and Ronaldo's story together, but still kept Ronaldo in the focus. I would have had Ronaldo show up at Steven's door one day with Andy. I would have had Andy off-screen realize that he wanted to learn more about the gems so that he could try to understand them better. And in doing so, found Ronaldo's blog. I would have had he and Ronaldo actually strike up a sort of a friendship, and Andy eventually come to town to talk to Ronaldo directly, only then finding out that Ronaldo lives in the same town as Steven and Greg. So Ronaldo, in showing Andy where Steven lives, gives Andy the perfect opportunity to try to help the gems. He moves in with them, he does all the toxic ally things that Ronaldo does in this episode. All the while Ronaldo's hanging around watching him and watching the negative impact this is having on the gems until finally he and Steven have a talk where Steven mentions that he feels like he can't be assertive around this new family member lest he might drive them away, so Ronaldo is assertive for him, telling Andy that he is making a negative impact rather than a positive one and growing as a person as a result because he starts to realize that he has the potential to be that same negative person, that he has the potential to embody those same negative traits. Andy gets that little bit of background growth that I've been expecting since he showed up in Gem Harvest, and Ronaldo actually gets to be the hero of the episode. They still could have had the commentary about toxic allyship in the episode. They still could have had a couple of references to the toxic side of the fandom in the episode. And yet the episode would have been, narratively speaking, much better, much tighter, much more concise, and much kinder to a character that we've been expected to care about since the first season. At the end of the day, the only thing that Rocknaldo showed us about Ronaldo is that the characterization that I've been giving him in my reviews of the asshole who never learns has actually been accurate. And even that, in and of itself, would have been fine if that's the direction they've always intended to go with it. But the episode just wasn't good. One of y'all over on Tumblr pointed out that it was boring. And it was! Because here's something I bet the crew didn't think about when they were making this episode. People who aren't really deep in the SU fandom aren't going to care about gemstones. They're not going to care about all of the stuff that Ronaldo was doing that was nods to the fandom. And people who are deep in the fandom and who do have gemstones and who do the kind of stuff that Ronaldo does in this episode aren't going to be entertained by seeing it portrayed in such a lackluster light, in such a half-negative light. So immediately the plot of this episode is alienating to the majority of the people who are going to watch it to the point that they're not going to get any enjoyment out of it. This entire episode was a mess on multiple levels. And once again, it comes down to lost potential. This basic plot had so much potential, and it didn't live up to it at all. And yet there's still the slightest glimmer of jumping off points from which it could have. Just enough that it makes me angry thinking about it. That it makes me angry thinking about what it could have been. I still like this show. A lot. I think that while we've got some of the weaker episodes of the series recently, we've also gotten some of the strongest. But I'm not gonna lie. After the wasted potential that was the new Crystal Gems, and now the wasted potential that was this episode, I'm starting to worry. I know I have no right to tell the crew how to write their story, but I do have the right to feel as if they're betraying the story and they're betraying their audience by the way that they're choosing to tell it. And that's where I'm going to stop because I don't want to turn this into nothing but a rant. So as per usual, I want to ask you guys, if you have seen this episode, what did you think of it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.
My gem name is my mom's name. Actually, the only time gems really call me that is if they're about to kidnap me or beat me up.
That's rough, buddy.